Everyone, Sunil Sunder Raj from In the Zone. Today, I have the honor of welcoming in Paul Schwartz from The Record and NorthJersey.com. Paul has covered high school sports here in New Jersey for almost 50 years, ranging from baseball to basketball to wrestling. But he's best known for his coverage of track and field. Paul, thank you so much for taking some time out today to chat with me.
Thank you for having me, Sunil.
I have to ask you, Paul, almost 50 years here as a sports writer, how you've been able to maintain that longevity as a sports writer.
I think one of the things, well, first of all, I credit all of the athletes and coaches who've been so kind to me over the years, but I also have to credit the amazing technology. I don't think I would have been able to survive having to go into an office, having to sit at a typewriter. I think all of the advances that have been made in technology over the last 20 or so years have enabled me to continue doing it without taking up a ridiculous amount of time. It's also because I actually love it. I love the sport. I love sports. I love high school sports, and to be paid for it is, at the same time, is really extraordinary for me. I've met a lot of my dearest friends and longest lasting friends through it. And it's just been a thrill a minute for almost the entire amount of my term. And I hope I can keep doing it as long as I'm healthy, as long as someone will have me.
That's great. I was wondering, Paul, can you take each individual sport you have covered and just as far as your approach to that sport, said every sport has its unique, challenges, or just again, how you cover it. I was just curious about that, if you can talk about that. So you cover a number of sports here,
Sure.
Baseball, football, wrestling. I even forgot also tennis as well.
Right. I've been fortunate enough to do a lot. And for most of the last 35 or 40 years, it's been mainly track and field and cross country, but I've done everything. And in recent years, I've actually dipped my toe back into some of the sports I covered in the past. It's a very good question, and each sport has its own challenges and ways to do things. For instance, I guess the whole way I started with The Record and with writing. I've never taken a journalism class, but I'm a good writer, and as I'm sure you know, I'm an attorney, so I've always had to be good with words, both written and oral. But I started back in high school, at Teaneck High School. We used to pay what we called correspondence in every high school, where every high school would appoint someone who'd be responsible for calling in the football and basketball and baseball games, the sporting events, to The Record, and we'd get a couple of bucks for each game we did. And we wouldn't write it, we'd just call it in, and the people on the other end of the phone would take the information, we'd follow a form, and for the games that weren't covered, we'd give them a summary, the one-paragraph summaries. And I liked it, I was pretty good at it. And then when the reporters would occasionally come to an event, I was also the manager of the football, basketball, and baseball teams at Teaneck that year. So when the reporters would come, I'd always have some extra information for me, and I guess they liked what I did. And I started to do summer baseball. It used to be huge in North Jersey and also in The Record. Age group baseball, Babe Ruth, which was 13 to 15-year-old, Little League, of course, Connie Mack, which was 16 to 18, American Legion. And I was involved in a summer league where I was the official scorekeeper and statistician for the league. And I lived in Teaneck, and The Record was in Hackensack, and I started bringing the weekly report into the newspaper, along with the night's box scores, the line scores. And one day in 1971, one of the reporters there, of the whimsical name of Augie Borgie, I'll never forget him. He covered the Knicks during the 69-70 a championship year, and he took a liking to me. And he said, why don't you write a couple of paragraphs about the games? So I did. And I turned them in. I didn't get paid, but it was fine. And I was getting paid by the league. And I did it all summer. And fortunately for me, in 1971, the Connie Mack State Championship was being held in Bergen County, and the American Legion State Championship was being held in Bergen County. And at the end of the summer, the Connie Mack State Championship was being held in River Edge, or in Oradell, by the field in Oradell, not at the high school, but the memorial field.
Yes.
I spent all day. They brought me back. I wrote a story on the 6 games that had been held that day. And Augie was on the editor's desk that day. And he said, how do you spell your last name? And it said, by Paul Schwartz, special correspondent. And my very first article appeared in the Record the day after my 20th birthday on July 20th, 1971. And things sort of snowballed from there, because not only did the team that win the state championship in Connie Mack this year was a Bergen County team, they went on to win the Eastern Regionals, which were held in Ridgewood, coincidentally. And the finals were between 2 Bergen County teams. So I kept going all summer. And then the American Legion had a similar situation. And at the end of the summer, going back to my junior year at college, I had all these articles I'd written. And they said, you did a really good job. We know you're going to college. When you come back for Thanksgiving, would you cover a football game for us? Sure. Would you cover, when you're home Christmas break, would you cover some basketball? Sure. And one thing led to another. And all of a sudden, I was writing relatively regularly. Yeah. Then I got another break. At the end of, I graduated from college in 1973, and I was going to start, and I started law school at NYU in the fall, but I had no job for the summer. So I was working in the old Two Guys department store in some, in retail. So I know my dad was in retail, so okay. And the sports editor at the time, Bob Curlin, came in. I mean, not Bob Curlin. Bob Curlin saw me, who was a longtime reporter, told the editor that I was there and I was available. I got called in and they said, well, we got a lot of good local tennis players around. Would you like to develop a local tennis beat? We can't pay you mileage, but we can pay you $3 an hour, but you got to go to the places. We can't reimburse you. I said, great. I had a car. I was a kid. I wanted, and I covered the local tennis beat. And at the end of the year, they said, would you like to go to the U.S. Open at Forest Hills? And I got to cover the U.S. Open at Forest Hills. And I happened to be with a guy who's still a very well-renowned tennis reporter, Peter Bodo, who at the time worked for the Herald News. And we were together, and Billie Jean King was supposed to play Bobby Riggs in the famous Battle of the Sexes. Mm-hmm. And she had to default from the U.S. Open because of heat or whatever. This was only a few weeks before the tournament was going to take place. And Pete said, come on, let's go. He knew where Billie Jean was staying with her husband at the time. We went over there. We got an exclusive interview, the two of us. He was so nice to basically a competitor. And we got some great stories out of it. And, I started law school. I actually put off my first day of law school to cover the finals between Ken Rosewell and Jimmy Connors. And as it turned out, every time it looked as if my short career as a writer was coming to an end, I got another lucky happenstance, which allowed me to continue doing it. And here I am almost 50 years later.
I have to ask you, to have your name in that byline and to see your name in the paper, I have to ask you what that felt, it said, for you, just to see that. It must have been just an incredible experience.
Back then, it was stunning. I still like to see it. It's still fun for me to see it. But back then, it was like, are you kidding me? Well, I'll give you a story. Yeah. I covered tennis that year. I go to law school. And the way law school worked, our last classes were usually Thursday around noon. And I lived in the city. I lived in the dorm. Thursday around noon. And then there were no classes on Friday. So I got a job doing some part-time illegal clerking work in Hackensack. I'd leave NYU, take the subway home, take the A train home, get home, spend Thursday afternoon all day Friday at the law firm. Friday night, cover a football game or a basketball game, cover something else on Saturday, take the train back Sunday. And during the summer, they said, you want to do tennis? Excuse me. And I said, sure. So I did tennis. I covered a couple of pro tournaments. And again, went to Forest Hills. I'm interviewing on the run Ilie Nastase, the former great Romanian tennis player who was a character and could be very difficult with reporters, but for some reason he liked me. And I've got my pencil and paper and I'm jotting notes as we're walking from one court to another at Forest Hills. This is before Flushing Meadow, a couple of years before Flushing Meadow opened. And I look down the lane and there's one of my law professors about 50 feet away, and he's looking at me like, what the hell is he doing here? And I'm writing and whatever. And the first day of law school, he says, stop. He was one of my favorite professors too. He said, come by the office, I want to talk to you. And I knew what he was going to ask me about. And I come, what were you doing? And I tell him the story. He says, don't ever give that up. Even if whatever, I know, and this was, a pretty good law school and pretty competitive. He said, I know that you'll do well as an attorney, but try not to ever give that up because everybody needs something to deal with. And I never wanted to, but what he said really sort of inspired me. So it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool then. It's pretty cool now.
I like it when you say, you had your pen and your pad there, because now, of course, technology has changed so much over the years. I mean, maybe you had a tape recorder, I don't know, maybe back then, but that was pretty much it as far as, when you interviewed someone, Paul.
Well, a tape recorder back then is a whole lot bigger than a tape recorder was now.
I know.
But it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. You probably answered this question again, what makes, high school sports in general, so special to cover. I know there was an article out, maybe several months ago or maybe last year that some of the more memorable games that you have covered, said in your, almost 50 years, with the record. I know there was 1977, the Group 1 baseball final between Park Ridge and Florence, a classic pitcher's duel, and I love the reference to, as the pitcher's breaking the rules as far as the pitch count, and then
it's crazy.
Yeah, and then also
crazy.
Yeah, and then the story about I think there was an error, I think, with Park Ridge, and that you had an accident, I believe. If you want to sort of dive into that.
Years later, what happened was, years later, in 1977, I covered this classic game between Park Ridge and Florence for the state title that went, I don't know, I can't remember, it was 19 innings and went a long way. And about 30 years later, Park Ridge goes back to the state championship.
Yeah.
And somebody had written in the newspaper, in our paper, that it was going to be their first appearance or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, that's not right. I was there. And I go back and I go into my clip file at the time, and I'm walking down the stairs in my house, and we have a banister, but I've got something in one hand and my clip file in the other hand, and I slipped and fell and beat myself up a little bit, but I called it in and we made a correction. And 30 years later, that game still stuck with me. The another game of those three was my favorite basketball game of all time, which was the Bergen County Jamboree between two undefeated teams that went to double overtime. And again, 30 to 35 years later, I get a phone call from the gentleman at the record, and it really bothers me that I can't think of his name right now because unfortunately we lost him about a year ago. But he said, we came up with a video of the game. And so he and I watched the game and talked about the game for a podcast he did. And much to my surprise and pleasure, the game lived up the second time to the expectations I'd had in my mind from the memories of 30 odd years before. So, but I've seen a lot of stuff, it's not like it's all, he's just recalling stuff from eons ago. I've seen a lot of great races, a lot of great meets, a lot of great games, and I'm blessed with a pretty good memory, and they're all part of what makes me who I am today.
Another one that actually I think I was just looking in my notes that I had typed up. Was it John Enslin, I believe it was?
John Enslin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
John, we lost him. He actually had moved back to Colorado and unfortunately passed away, I'd say about 6 months to a year ago. But wonderful. I was a wonderful afternoon watching the game and reliving it with him. And it's funny, as a result of that, I got an email when I did the article that you talked about. I got an email from somebody who said, I have the tapes. I'll send you a copy. So now I have my own DVD of that game, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah. I had to ask you, Paul, there's one other game I know was the Group 3 basketball final between Edgewood and Pascack Valley. It said Jeff Jasper, it said an incredible coach, Hall of Fame. I mean, I was blessed and, thankful to cover, I believe, Coach Jasper's, I think it was his 1,000th career victory, I think, at Pascack Valley a couple of years ago. Can you just talk about that game?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, what's really interesting about that, and you go back into it, at the beginning, what helped me with the record, and I told the birth story, and I told the story of so many lucky breaks. One of the lucky breaks I got was the introduction and the development of girls' sports in the 70s. And we had two wonderful reporters, high school reporters, who went on to great success. One, the late, great Marty Noble, who spent years and years covering baseball. We lost him about a year ago. And the late, unfortunately, Ron Drogo, who went on to a great career with the Knicks and lots of newspapers. But they were the high school track and field guys sort of ahead of me. And I love track and field because as a kid, I would always go to the garden, the old garden, to watch track meets, because the Millrose Games was one of 5 or 6 meets a year back then. And my cousin was a world record shot putter by the name of Gary Gubner, who still holds the New York City high school shot put record. So we'd go watch my cousin compete, and I fell in love with the sport. Well, Marty and Ron were the track guys, and then girls track started. So the newcomer got the girls track beat, which was fantastic. So I got to go to all of these girls events and girls sports, basketball. So I wasn't, since I was low man on the totem pole and girls sports were just starting, I got to cover a lot of Jeff Jasper's games right at the beginning of his amazing career. And we've been friends for more than 40 years. And that game in particular is one of my favorite articles even now, even though they lost. And Jeff and I have talked about that game and subsequent games a lot of times over the years. And it's not always true, but a lot of times the better stories come from heartbreaking defeats. And what made this story so much fun, looking back, is the next year, that same group of girls came back and won the first of consecutive state championships, and I was there. So, that's a game I'll never forget. I can see it was in a high school. This one was one of the last state championship games played in a high school gym. It was a nice gym, but, and it's still one of my favorite quotes, and Jeff uses it from time to time. When you have to go 8 deep, you're in the NBA. And 1977, that was true. It's still true a latte, not as much as it used to be, but that's one of my favorite quotes from anybody over the years. And, to get the chance to see Hall of Fame and immortal coaches like Jeff, like Jacob Brown, like Ed Church from Hackensack, the late Bob Colbert, Park Ridge, Ralph Cobb from Old Tappan, many, many great football and basketball coaches to watch them on the sidelines, Greg Toll, Fred Stengel, Chuck Johnson. You know, it's really been a pleasure. And it's amazing that so many of the people who I have spent so much time with are still active in the sport and active in sports. And it's because high school sports, even with all the changes, still comes closest to being pure sport. Yes, there are ESPN shows football games and basketball games on TV, and we've had some issues and some problems over the years. But by and large, kids are playing that sport because they really love it and for no other reason. And that's what makes it easier for me to keep doing it 50 years later, because every year I've got a group of new 16, 17, 18-year-olds coming with their enthusiasm. And I think if you talk to most longtime coaches, they'll give you the same kind of answer.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you get, you know, not only to know the athletes, but also the parents as well.
Right.
You talked about the coaches.
It's really kind of cool. It's really kind of cool when the parents, it's kind of cool in one way and kind of scary in another way. When the parents say, "Oh, don't you remember me? I ran for so-and-so, and that's my son, or that's my daughter." And I tell my wife the first time they say, "That's my grandchild," might be when I finally hang it up, but I don't think that'll be the case either.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you about some of the honors that you received, Paul. Recently honored by the Armory Track Center in New York as a recipient of the Stan Saplin Award, as well as the National Scholastic Sports Federation with the Alan Dawson Award, and by the Penn Relays with the Jesse Abramson Award. What do those accolades mean to you personally, Paul?
Well, it's wonderful. I mean, it's just, for them to have happened in the same year was wonderful. But what makes it even, I don't want to say more special, but when I got the notice of the first award, which was the Saplin Award, it was within days of when I had been told with the changeover to Gannett that there was no room for me at the record. And that, of course, is a story that's a story of itself. And I credit the incredible track and field and cross country and sports community for giving me a second opportunity. And at the time I thought, well, I'm getting this award. I guess this is the end of my career. You get awards at the end of your career. And then I get my job back. I get the Dawson Award. And then at Penn Relays, Dave Johnson, who, by the way, is going to be retiring this coming year as the director of the Penn Relays, hands me, and it's a total surprise. Friends of mine had invited me at Penn Relays, which is always a really busy weekend, to go to lunch in the Penn Relays Club, which was basically the same food we could get in the press room, but it was with friends and whatever. And I'm in there in this group, and I'm actually leaning out the window watching two Riverdale kids, the Daly boys, the Daly twins from Riverdale, run in the 4-mile relay for Penn. And I'm leaning out the window watching the race, and I hear my name, and I turn around, and here's Dave Johnson presenting me with the Abramson Award and a watch, which is like probably as close to the highest award you could receive as a track and field rider in this country. And it was like, I was stunned. I was so stunned. It's rare for me to be speechless, as you might have guessed.
Yeah.
I was speechless. I really didn't know what to say. Yeah. So, you know, to be honored by my peers and by my friends is so wonderful, but it also makes me aware of how I represent my community and my profession. And I'm proud that people have thought enough of me to give me those awards.
Yeah. You know, what I've found in high school sports over the last several years, Paul, is that it's really a small community. Like when it comes to the reporters, you know, the journalists, can you talk about that? You know, sometimes I find like, you know, you're running into basically the same people who cover the sports. Have you found that, like, you know, where you've developed those, you know, long time, you know, friendships, relationships, you know, with journalists? Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, in some cases, we're competitive as heck, but the people at Mile Split, my old friend Jim Lambert, who was at the Star Ledger for many years, and then went to Milesplit. My dear old friend, Ed Grant, who is really the legend. Eddie's 94. He lost his Penn relay streak last year because it was postponed at like 74 years in a row. But he's a dear friend. I was fortunate enough to share a byline, the first time we ever shared a byline, and knowing each other for more than 30 years, with Jerry Carino from mycentraljersey.com on the story on Ed Grant. There are so many people who have become friends of mine. Elliot Denman from the Asbury Park Press, who's amazing. But I think what's the most fun for me is because of my nature, and not my nature, but because of the fact that this has basically been a passion and a hobby rather than my only way of making a living, that I was able to help, I think, mentor some of the top people whose names you'd recognize were on ESPN, the New York Times. Ken Davidoff, who's at the New York, I guess is he at the Times or the Post now? I think he may be at the Post. Long-time outstanding baseball writer, worked as my number 2 track guy one season. Kimberly Martin, who's on ESPN on a regular basis, has been with a number of really top newspapers. She was my number 2 one year. Diana Rossini, who's on the NFL show on ESPN all the time. She does ESPN SportsCenter. I covered her in her 1 year of high school running, where she had a tremendous year. And a number of other people who have gone on to great success were people who I was privileged to work alongside, both at the Record and on my own beat. And I'm proud to say that whenever I run across them, it's a great day. And same thing at Penn Relays. Every year we go to Penn Relays, and it's a lot of the same people covering the sport year in and year out. And of course you develop a relationship.
Yeah. I know that the staff has changed over the years also at the Record, NorthJersey.com. But I was curious that, like, with, writers from, like, cover different sports, as far as, with those, staff members, how, again, maintaining, those relationships as well and developing them. Can you talk about that as well, Paul?
Yeah, we have a remarkable staff. It's not nearly as large as it used to be, but it's a remarkable staff. Our sports editor of NorthJersey.com was also the regional sports editor for Gannett in that area. Dave Rivera has been with us for 30 years. He's been, to have him be my boss now is really terrific. My direct boss, the assistant sports editor, Zach Miller, has only been with us for about 5 years, but he's fit right in. I mean, he's really done a terrific job. And we have a terrific staff that really works well together. We have 2 meetings and we do them not so much by Zoom, we do them by audio Zoom, because who needs to look at each other's ugly mugs every week? But twice a week we meet together. Greg Matura, Greg Tartaglia, Sean Farrell, Nick, I always screw up last name. He's got a long last name, so I'll just call him Nick G, Rob Aiken. We really work well together. Our clerks, Joe Ragazzino and Ryan Rivero, we really work well together. We bounce things off each other. We come up with terrific ideas. They don't always work out, but we're always, we're always working towards a common goal. And it's really fun to do that. I mean, that's why I said to you earlier, I'm jumping in, sort of out of my comfort level. I could easily just sit with cross country and track and stay with that within my own niche. But because our staff isn't as large as it used to be, it gives us an opportunity to do things to help the staff out. So I'll do something remotely with football. We'll be involved with all sorts of things. Obviously, when I'm in New Jersey and it's a normal season, I can do much more than now. But even now, we can help each other out. It's great. It's not what's really missing, though, Sunil, and I'm not sure. I know you're relatively new to the field. but we used to be years ago when the print media was really everything.
Yeah.
We used to, when the newspaper closed for the week, when we had like a Saturday night and we went to bed early, we'd go out as a group. And a lot of, and yeah, maybe there was alcohol involved, but I'm not much of a drinker, so I was never really part of that. We would gather together at people's houses and just shoot the breeze for hours because we had the same interests. We don't get to do that much anymore. And by the way, I left out my best friend at the newspaper and the best guy we have at the newspaper, and that's our high school columnist, Darren Cooper. And if they're editing this, make sure that gets in, because I just realized how ridiculous that would sound. Darren and I talk probably 3 or 4 times a week, not just about sports, but about everything. And to me, he right now, we've been very fortunate over the years to have a lot of columnists at the Record, both high school and professionally, who've done a great job for us. And Darren is just everywhere. I mean, he knows everybody, and he's he would have loved the old days. Greg Matura would have loved the old days, and we were part of the old days. The younger group would have loved it too, and that's one thing we lose today. We don't have the social camaraderie we used to have because it's harder to do. We're all working remotely even before COVID. I don't think I've been in the Records office 10 times in the last 20 years because there's no need.
Yeah. I don't know if it's nostalgic or it's is the right word to use as far as the Record, said the main office building not being there in Hackensack. I mean, it was there, for the longest time, and now of course moved over, what is it, to
Woodland Park.
Yeah, Woodland Park.
Yeah, it's even much smaller there than it was.
Yeah, can you talk about that? I mean, it's almost, for a lot of us, I mean, that building, represented so much history, to see the end of an era, and to see it close and, then move to Woodland Park. Can you just, quickly talk about that, Paul?
Yeah, it's really hard because I always thought, and I still think to a certain extent it's true, that a newspaper like The Record, which covers our area so well, would survive when a lot of other papers wouldn't in the old form. But because of the advent of the internet, and while I praised technology before, and I always will, it destroyed the business model for the print media. We probably were not quick enough to realize how much of a change that would make, although clearly digitally we are catching up. But in the meantime, we've lost a generation of people who grew up with the paper and can't really accept the fact that it's website first, newspaper second now. That's hard. That's hard because there's a clear loss to the community of having a reporter at every board meeting, Board of Ed meeting, at every council meeting, at more football games and basketball games and hockey games and local activities than we were in the past. If I could go back 25 years and change anything, it would be to tell the people 25 years ago, hey, the internet's coming, wake up, deal with it, monetize it. Don't say, oh, we're doing so great, we don't have to change anything. And maybe we'd be in a better position today with the newspaper. Our business is, I don't want to say it's in trouble, but our business has undergone such a change that the traditional, that goes back to Pulitzer and Hearst and the 1800s, if not all the way back to John Peter Langer, it's changed more in the last 20 years than in the 200 years before it. And we were slow to recognize it. And as newspapers and as media companies, we shouldn't have been. And that's what I regret. I regret the fact that we aren't able to serve our community the way we used to because we sort of got overrun by technology and didn't deal with it properly.
Yeah. Hey, to me, I love reading hard copy. It's like
Oh, me too.
I wrote on my college newspaper staff, and then I think I still enjoy reading. Of course, the record. It said that it's nothing. I mean, yeah, you read on your phone and everything these articles, but it still doesn't have that same feel again as reading a physical. As
We're the last,
paper.
and I'm sure I'm a little older than you,
Yeah.
but we're the last generation that understands that. I used to keep for decades scrapbooks of every one of my articles and every article on track and field. And I stopped keeping scrapbooks 2 years ago because the articles, when they are in the paper, oftentimes are not the same day. The website stuff is unbelievable. We're able to do more. I probably couldn't have done that series of memorable events in track and field, or we couldn't have done the series of memorable games in the newspaper. It just takes up too much space.
Yeah.
So it's liberating to be on the internet, but yeah, it's not the same.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say to you. Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. Ask you about adapting to that new technology, the new form of media, social media. Back in the day, a typewriter. It said then you evolved to the computer, but it's just the fact now that a phone now, a cell phone now is what a lot of people, a lot of journalists depend on it, utilize these days, Paul.
I two things. Number one, I never would have gotten in touch with you except through, Twitter and social media, where I saw a wonderful article on Tom Cashel and reached out to you, and you were kind enough to reach out back to me. And there are a lot of those positives about it. What I feel a negative is we've lost a sense of perspective that we need. Not everything needs to be dealt with in a 24-hour or 6-hour or 1-hour news cycle. We need a chance to take a deep breath in everything, including high school sports, pro sports, certainly in politics, government, and our day-to-day life. We need to take a breath and analyze. And a lot of the analysis has disappeared to be replaced by instant media, instant journalism. And I don't know how you ever could have controlled that because of the advent of social media, but it certainly hasn't helped in that regard.
I wanted to ask you about your preparation. I said, as a journalist, you probably know this better than anyone that said there are no set hours. It's like all working all crazy hours. And then just as far as preparing, to cover a game, track and field, said me. Can you just talk about that process, Paul, that how you developed that, when you first started and over the years, even to this day, after almost 50 years of covering, sports, can you talk about that?
Boy, these are great questions, I'm telling you. Number one, let me approach the track cross country separately from the other sports because of my experience and because of what I've done. Preparation for track and field is every day. In other words, every meet, every advance, every history is preparation for the next meet. I don't have to, when I'm getting ready in, let's say, a normal season, when I'm getting ready to preview the Bergen County Group Cross Country Championships, I don't have to do a lot of deep research because I've already written about the stuff. And so it's just a matter of putting it together and crystallizing it into a story for that week. When you've been doing it as long as I have, it almost comes naturally for those sports. But I'll change over. A couple of years ago, I pitched in. We moved from Wyckoff to Wanacue to a 55 and over community in Wanacue, and like a mile from Lakeland Regional High School. So when it came to the end of the football season and the sectional playoffs, they said, "Can you cover a game?" I'd love to. And I actually ended up covering when the NJIC, the small schools conference started with a football tournament. I volunteered to cover one of those games. Well, I didn't covering the game was the same. Okay, walking the sidelines with the notebook and taking records. But I didn't know anything about the teams except from what I had read in the newspaper, which, again, wasn't as much as I was because I was focused on my own sport. So I was fortunate enough to call both coaches in advance, talk to them a little bit about their teams. I knew both of them. Ironically, one, the coach at Manchester, his brother is a workers' compensation judge I appear before regularly. And the Lakeland coach, his son and cousin were very good shot putters. So we had and after 50 years, if you don't know me, you really haven't been paying attention, whether you like me or not. Okay, so I got the information. Same thing happened. I covered Rutherford against New Milford, and got the information. And then the game itself, the Lakeland Manchester game wasn't so great. It was freezing cold and whatever. It was really cold, and Lakeland was better than Manchester, but Manchester had gotten to this spot for the first time in years, so that was a story in and of itself. But the New Milford-Rutherford game was fantastic. New Milford got a big lead. I was on the Rutherford sideline. Rutherford made a tremendous comeback to win the game. I mean, and there, it's like the old fire engine. The fire alarm goes off and you're ready to go. The biggest problem I had, which wouldn't have happened in the old days because I had gone back to the office, but I was going to file from New Milford and they had problems with their internet, and I ended up, because it was close to the deadline, getting out of, I'd written most of the story on the computer and saved it, but then I had to go to a McDonald's on Route 4, which unfortunately is now closed, and file it from there. That was sort of different than the old days. In the old days, it even at times dictate your story on deadline over the phone, but your deadlines were later because you had the cold type, hot type, all that stuff. Now everything's being done digitally. So that was an adjustment that had to be made. But the process was still somewhat the same. Covering the games was still the same. Preparation is go, and even if I get, the first thing I've always done at a football game, get to the field at least an hour before the game, get the program. Go over with the manager of each of the teams. Okay, are these numbers correct? Are the names associated with the numbers? So you don't want to write a whole game story about John Smith scoring the winning touchdown and find out he switched jersey with Todd Green, and it was Todd Green that scored the winning touchdown. So that preparation doesn't change. But and I think the younger sports writers, the people I've seen, they still do the preparation. I know the people on my staff that I work with, when I know they're going to an event, let's say they're covering a track and field or cross country event, if they don't reach out to me, and most of the times they do, I'll reach out to them because I don't want them to be covering my sport at a disadvantage. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but that preparation's every bit as important today. It's just a little bit different today sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wanted to actually transition. We talked about it off the air. You're a graduate of American University and, of course, NYU Law School. What's more impressive, you have represented injured workers as an attorney for more than 40 years. Can you just, describe, what that's been like, working in that profession, Paul?
Yeah, I'll be glad to talk about that. Again, fortuitous circumstances. I started working in a law firm, a small law firm, right out of law school in Bergen County, because they didn't want to, I knew right away I didn't want to be a corporate lawyer. I didn't want to work on Wall Street. I didn't want to work the hours that those guys needed to work. My professor Hutton had long ago confirmed the fact that, look, you have a passion. Follow your dream. And I started working in a small office and did all sorts of different things, one of which was workman's compensation. And I liked it because you were sort of on your feet. You were litigating every day, even though you weren't necessarily trying cases. You were negotiating with insurance companies and other lawyers. You were representing human beings rather than entities. And what you were doing for them was important on the spot on both sides. And it's a great bar. The workers' compensation bar is a great bar. Petitioners, respondents, it's a wonderful a subset of the law where we really appreciate, admire, and respect each other tremendously. But I did a little bit of that, and then a circumstance came about where suddenly I had to find a new job in a hurry. And I ended up going to applying for a workers' comp job at a law firm in Patterson that still exists, got the job, and went from that to another workers' compensation job. And basically, I've had 3 jobs in the field in almost 50 years of practice. I'm still doing a little work. I'm basically retired, but I'm still doing a little bit of work with a few clients now. Mm-hmm. And it melded well, and it allowed me to meld well with my passion of writing, because while I worked very hard during the day, I wasn't writing legal briefs at night. I didn't have to do depositions. I was in court. It was a lot of personal interaction. We were the field of workman's comp. Basically, I represent injured workers, and in workers' comp, the guiding product in New Jersey is if you're injured arising out of and in the course of your employment, you're covered. You don't have to prove negligence. You don't have to prove fault. There are lots of rules regarding it, but the basic premise is if you get hurt at work, you're going to be covered under workman's comp. And the question I did, and what I have done for all that time, is to make sure that those people got what was legally entitled to, and yes, fought for them against insurance companies with lawyers who were doing their job to try and minimize the benefits they paid to people. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the judge was there to, if we couldn't reach an agreement, to reach one for us. And it worked out. It really enabled me to continue writing because of that. And I laugh and I say another reason was I didn't get married until much later. And fortunately, my wife and family were supportive of me that I could continue to do both things. And here I am. I mean, yeah. I've been so blessed in so many ways, and so fortunate to spend my entire working career basically doing 2 things I really like doing.
That's correct.
I appreciate it.
I wanted to ask you at American University, Paul, what your major was there.
Political science.
Medical. Okay.
Okay, cool. I wanted to be a lawyer, but I also envisioned myself getting involved in some sort of political background. And, one of my hobbies, and continues to this day, I have a large collection of political campaign buttons. So I've been very active in that. Washington, D.C. was a great place to go to school at the time. It was a much smaller community than it is today. Mm-hmm. But surprisingly, you would think, well, you went to Washington, you were interested in politics, you want to be, how'd you get out of there? By the time I was a senior, as much as I loved D.C., I was afraid if I didn't go to law school somewhere else and didn't leave D.C., I'd never leave. And I think I was right. And while I have a lot of friends who have stayed and have prospered over the years, I'm pretty happy I made the decision I did. But AU was a great place to go to school. From a sports standpoint, I was a basketball and baseball manager in college, and I was part of the team. And the star of our team and a classmate of mine was Kermit Washington, who I got to know really well. That's a podcast of its own at another time. But during that time, I met people like Dr. Tom Davis, Tom Young, who later coached at Rutgers, Dr. Tom Davis, a tremendous Hall of Fame basketball coach, Joe Boylan, who does the broadcasting from Rutgers basketball now, but went on to a tremendous career as the athletic director of Loyola, Maryland. I got to meet all these people who I still see today from time to time, and I shake myself. I almost feel at times like I'm Forrest Gump with the people I've been able to meet over the years through this hobby of mine, not even my full-time profession. And I keep saying it, I know it's boring at times, but I'm so blessed that this worked out the way it did.
Yeah. I was wondering about the bridge from American University to NYU Law School. I was just wondering about that, Paul, like, just as far as ending up there at NYU Law School. It's just...
Well, that's it's not a simple story. I applied to a bunch of law schools, about 7, but they were all the top class schools. And I really wanted to go to the University of Virginia. That was the law school I wanted to go to. And what I didn't know at the time, that I'd made a mistake, that UVA at the time took 50% of its class from Virginia residents and 50% from everywhere else. And going to school at AU, I could have easily established residency in Virginia in an apartment had I realized it. So it turned out I got accepted into the only school I got accepted into at first was the University of Pittsburgh Law School, which I had applied to because it was the one law school that didn't ask for an essay. I was tired of essays, and I had made friends with a pirate scout who said, "You get to the University of Pittsburgh, I'll get you a season's pass." So I got into Pittsburgh. I was like the first person in my class that year to get into a law school, because I got into Pitt like in early December, which was really something back then. I got into nothing else, and comes April, the last school, I get waitlisted by NYU. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm going to the University of Pittsburgh. Well, NYU asked for a second essay. I wrote a fairly bitter essay, I thought. And I still remember it. I basically said, if I realized then what I knew now, I wouldn't have gotten involved in school politics and the newspaper and baseball and basketball. I had just been a grind and gone to class and got straight A's and whatever. And lo and behold, I got in. So I went to NYU Law School. Again, I went there with no pretensions. I was happy to be there. I was with some great people there, some very prominent jurists and lawyers and whatever. But I wanted to follow my own path, which enabled me to do what I said before, to work, to go to school during the week, to work a few hours at a law firm in New Jersey, and then work for the newspaper. And it worked out pretty well. I have friends. I always laughed. I have friends for a while I covered the Islanders. The Islanders was the third team in the beat, but I had season tickets to the Islanders during their glory days. And during their glory days, every once in a while, I get to cover a game out there. And this was in the glory days of Potvin and Trottier and Bassi and the marvelous teams. And I got to know them because I'd cover 5 or 6 games a year. And a very good friend of mine at the time was AP's #1 hockey writer. So I got to meet the guys right away, and they took me, they accepted me right away. And I remember going to a game with a friend of mine from NYU who was was on a big time partnership path. And I had to cover a game on New Year's Eve, an early game on New Year's Eve, and then we were going to go out together. I don't even know if I was with anybody that night, but he and his wife were there, and we were going to go to a party. And so I posted my story. I sent him my story. I'm leaving the parking lot at the Island late, and Dennis Potvin was leaving at the same time. And he said, "Hey, good to see you." I introduced him. "Good to see you. Nice to see you, Paul. We'll see you soon." And he walked away. And now this guy was about to become a partner in a big Wall Street law firm. He said to me, "You know Dennis Potvin?" And I was like, "Well, wait a minute." So, so I made my choice. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah. I just have a couple more. I can't thank you enough, Paul. Again, for your time. Chatting about, said your background here. Talking about family. We talked off here. Born in New York, moved to New Jersey when you were 16. Attended Teaneck High School. I had to ask you about your time at Teaneck High School. And also family as well. Like, if you can.
Oh, my wife Wendy. I married Wendy, and I've been married 23 years. I'm stepfather to her son, Drew, who's getting married in May, and he's one of the greatest kids in the world. His fiance, Maggie, is wonderful. I've been blessed with a family that put up with me. Let's put it that way. My wife's not really a sports fan. She knew what she was getting when she married me, but she put up with a lot of long nights and a lot of dealing with somebody else's kid, but I always made time for my own. I coached him all through a little league and that stuff. He didn't particularly love athletics, and he's gone into a wonderful career. I've been blessed. I really have. For you to think it's interesting enough to interview me is another one of those blessings. I mean, I can tell a story. I can be a little long-winded, as you can tell, but I think I tell a pretty good story. But it's been so much fun, and that's why even at my age, I still find it fun. I'm excited. I can't wait for coronavirus to go past, so I can go back to Penn Relays this year, so I can be outside.
That's what I was going to say. I didn't want to forget that, Paul, that how, this whole COVID-19 pandemic has, affected, the coverage and, not being able to do that. I don't want to forget about that. And furthermore, we would, you mentioned off there about, also coaching in the Met League. But if you want to first address, just with the COVID-19 pandemic and just again, that's how that's
affected. I mean, the COVID-19 thing, this group, my wife and I always say that we've been inconvenienced. Okay, really, thank God. Although we've had a little bit of tangential tie into it, we've basically been inconvenienced. But I obviously feel for anyone who's lost anyone or seriously ill. I think it's going to be years before we know the whole impact on those who even so-called were asymptomatic. And I feel for all of them, but I also feel for those kids in high school and college now who are losing seasons that they can't ever get back. From a statistical standpoint and from a historical standpoint, we have great athletes who'll never be looked upon in the future for as good as they were because we won't have the numbers to prove it. And again, is it really that important in the grand scheme of things? No, but you want to look back. You want to be able to compare yourself to those that came in the past. That's why the sport of track and cross country is so great to cover, because you can compare yourself to kids who ran years ago. Right now, I'm covering a young lady whose mom I covered. She's breaking her mom's records, and her mom was magnificent. Part of a great family. She'll get that opportunity, hopefully, in cross country, but she already lost one season of track. The kids lost a season of baseball they'll never get back. And, thank God that there's some semblance of a football season. And God bless everybody in New Jersey. If we can pull this thing off, no one should ever make a joke about New Jersey again. Yeah. Because if we can pull this off, and we're damn close to being able to do it, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And credit to everyone who's had a part in that, from the coaches to the parents to the teachers to the governor to the doctors and nurses and everybody. If we can pull this off, it may be the greatest thing I've ever seen in my lifetime. And yeah, it's not going to end up in MetLife Stadium for the football championship. It's not going to end up at Homedale Park for the state meet champions. But in many ways, it's a bigger victory than any of those could ever be. And then we hope that by next year, we can be back to some semblance of normal and get those guideposts back in our lives again.
Yeah. Hey, just something popped up into my mind here is that when you cover, an athlete, said earning an award or a team winning a championship. I mean, for me, like, I've been covering it for several years. There's always like almost like an adrenaline rush, like when you see that happen, like, and the team, or a player, raises a MVP award. Can you talk about that? What
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
There's supposedly no cheering in the press box.
Yeah.
Okay, and for most of the season, when I'm covering events involving multiple teams from our area or a football game between two teams in our area, I don't care who wins. I want everybody to play well. I want everybody to do well. I really don't care who wins. Yeah. But when you get down to the state level and one of the teams you covers or kids you cover are competing for statewide or regional championships, you're lying if you're not saying there's a certain amount of rooting interest, okay? You're lying. You're just not being a human being. And while your stories need to reflect the impartiality, when somebody wins, especially if it's a surprise, a gold medal at a championship, you're delighted for them because you've seen what it's done for them. On the other hand, when it doesn't go so well for someone, you're heartbroken for them. Your heart goes out to what they see as a failure, which isn't a failure. It's just not the ultimate success. And so while I've always laughed and said, I really don't know a whole lot about training techniques in track and field. And, I do know some, I've learned it over the years, but I don't know how to train an athlete. But I do know for the large majority of the time, how to help boost the confidence of an athlete. And that's what I try to do. Is it totally objective? No, but I'm not favoring any one athlete over any other athlete ever. But if one of our North Jersey kids does a great job at states, I'm elated for that person. Yeah. I'm elated. And I'm elated because it also means I'm going to have a great story to write about a triumph. Even though, as I said earlier, sometimes the best stories are written about a setback.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think my final question here, Paul, is what is your message to, I guess, younger people either attempting to break into, journalism, especially the sports, media field, and I think even established, people who are, on the inside, working in the field, because I said you have, you've seen it, you've lived it, you've breathed, said sports media for almost 50 years. What is, you're I think, the best person to, offer that advice, I think, to people here.
Well, I thank you for asking. And the major point I would say, be passionate about what you're doing. If you're covering high school sports and your goal is the NFL, be passionate about the high school sports. Don't be keeping an eye on the next possible goal. If you cover your sport well, you'll be noticed. It's harder now. There's less ability to do it in the traditional method, the traditional newspaper method. So if you don't, use a website like this website, use a blog, use social media, develop an expertise, but have a passion for it, and never, 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 never underestimate or talk down to your audience. Never. Respect your audience, respect what they want, never mail it in. Never mail it in. In almost 50 years of doing this, that's what I think I'm most proud of, that I'm as passionate today as I was when I first did my first story 50 years ago, and I never mail it in. And that's my advice.
Sounds good. Hey, Paul, again, it's been an absolute honor and privilege, interviewing you, today. I said, wishing you continued success. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I pity your editor.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.